Now, there's also been an almighty row recently over the expansion of ULEZ, the ultra-low emission zone, to cover the whole of London. What are the health benefits? Well, our FactCheck team has been looking at the evidence, and the scheme charges non-compliant vehicles £12.50 a day to drive within the zone. And we've been looking at data from London Mayor Sadiq Khan's own office to assess the health benefits. And that document says that expanding ULEZ to outer London would result in 26 fewer hospital admissions caused by air pollution this year, as well as adding 214 years to London's life expectancy in 2023. That's 13 minutes on average per Londoner this year, but obviously those who have health concerns would benefit considerably more, and they would go on being life expectancy gains in future years, according to the Mayor's office, although they expect the benefits to reduce over time as people would update their vehicles irrespective of ULEZ. They also estimated changes in air quality contributing to that change in life expectancy this year. Take nitrogen dioxide, a key air pollutant. The report says expanding ULEZ would cause a minor reduction in exposure to harmful nitrogen dioxide, lowering the average Londoner's exposure by 1.3%. Next, particulates from polluting vehicles. It forecasts negligible changes in exposure to particulates, with those expected to fall by just 0.1%. And as for nitrogen oxides, it predicts a higher, moderate 5.4% fall in emissions across London. Now, these are percentage changes. They may sound small, but TfL is keen to stress that because outer London is so massive, even a small drop in percentage terms can translate to a big fall in the tons of pollutant released into the atmosphere. The amount of nitrogen oxide is expected to fall by 362 tons in outer London this year, thanks to the expansion. And a spokesperson for the Mayor told us the science is clear. The impact of ULEZ expansion will be transformative. They say it will mean 5 million Londoners breathing cleaner air. And they told us that the scheme is part of a wider package of bold measures to clean up London's air. Now, our FactCheck team has been looking at more of the evidence for the latest round and the earlier phase of the ULEZ scheme, and you can find their report on our website, channel4.com/factcheck. Well, joining me now are Sarah Rowe from the Clean Cities campaign and Councillor Neil Buckley from Leeds City Council. He's the Conservative group's lead for transport. Sarah, first of all, let's deal with this 214 years life expectancy in London, this addition in 2023. Works out at 30 minutes on average, but some people will be affected more than others. Is that transformative for the ULEZ?
I think that's a misunderstanding of the impacts and the health impacts that air pollution have and the way that those are distributed. So that will be transformative for some people, in that for people who are the most vulnerable to air pollution impacts, those with underlying health conditions or asthma, it will make a huge difference. It might not make much difference to other people who are already healthy or... So I think that average is a misleading claim about the ULEZ.
Well, let's take the 26 fewer hospital admissions then caused by air pollution. Do you think that is a transformative intervention that, as a result of ULEZ?
I think that the fact that air pollution is going to cost the NHS billions of pounds unless further action is taken is something that all of us would agree we would like to prevent. We care about the NHS, we know that it's struggling. Action on air pollution could really save the NHS billions of pounds, and I think that is really important and something that most people would like to see.
Yeah, well, would you like to see that, Neil? Save the NHS billions of pounds, save lives, both in Wales and London, with these measures?
It's all a question of being proportionate, because we've just put down a motion for tomorrow's council meeting in Leeds to say that there should not be a ULEZ type scheme in Leeds. And it's just to avoid this imposition on ordinary people of the charges of ULEZ type schemes. For instance, it's always the poor who will pay the charge. The well-off don't care because they'll simply pay it, but it's the poor who will suffer.
But in Wales, these 20 miles per hour zones, they reckon will save 10 lives, 2,000 injuries. That's got to be a good thing, isn't it?
again, it's proportionate. 20 miles an hour, what's next? 15 miles an hour? It's silly. The economy has got to continue growing, and it's got to be assisted to grow. And you can't put these 20 mile an hour impositions on really quite major roads just willy-nilly like this. It's rather silly, actually.
Well, I don't think they're doing it willy-nilly. I mean, they have assessed this, but Sarah, is it silly?
Well, just to go back to the point about how the worry about the charge on people who are struggling, absolutely there is a cost of living crisis and we need to be careful about any charges on people. But there is also a social justice element to who suffers most from air pollution, which tends to be the poorest, most marginalised neighbourhoods that deal with the worst impacts. So with any scheme, there needs to be targeted support for people who need it in any change that asks people to pay a charge. But there is a cost to air pollution too, in lost working days or time spent in hospital, that is also disproportionately paid by the poorest communities.
Neil, we want to do all that we can to reduce people's exposure to toxic pollutants like nitrogen oxides. Not Sadiq Khan who said that. That was the clean air strategy of the Conservative government in 2018. All that they can. That would include these sorts of schemes, right?
Yeah, but Sadiq Khan's scheme, the London scheme, inner London is different to outer London. You've got a whole different set of situations. Outer suburbs, into the countryside, you've got clean air. It's really quite clean, actually. And no buses, for instance, no tubes.
But this is a strategy of the Conservative government. What's the evidential basis if you want to reduce those pollutants for turning your back on it?
It's not a question of turning your back on it. It's a question of being proportionate and not giving charges to the poorest in society, because Leeds is like these outer London areas. We've got lack of buses. We've got no mass transit scheme yet, with no tube, obviously. And therefore, it's difficult for the poor to get around.
So, Sarah, is there another way of doing it? Because you're in Manchester, aren't you? Andy Burnham, the mayor there, has paused it there. He's talking about carrots. He wants people to be given incentives to change their cars rather than introduce a clean air zone.
Yeah, absolutely. There needs to be action in all sorts of areas, public transport being one of them, more investment in active travel being another one, making it safer for people to get around in ways that are good for them and good for their communities. But I would say that the evidence in all sorts of behavioural change science is that people need both carrots and sticks. So absolutely, there needs to be investment in public transport, and lots of our cities are trying to do that well. But there also needs to be a disincentive on the harmful behaviour, and at the moment, polluting cars in cities is a hugely harmful behaviour.
Yeah, what might you say to Neil to win him over, to make that argument for clean air zones, for 20-mile-per-hour zones?
Well, I guess I would say I'm not necessarily pro-clean air zones, I'm pro-clean air, and I assume that Neil would be too, and I'm sure there's lots of things that we can agree on. You know, we've talked about better public transport. I would say that we need lots of... The crisis that we face on both air pollution and climate mean that we need all tools available to us. And it's government evidence that says that clean air zones are one of the most effective tools that there are. So we need to understand the evidence, we need to make sure policies work well, we need to make sure they're implemented well and they don't disadvantage people. But ultimately, we do need to tackle the air pollution crisis that we face.
We do need to tackle it. Why are you not convinced when it will save lives? And frankly, we've seen the catastrophe of climate change this summer. It will have an impact on that front as well.
Well, we had a clean air zone proposed in Leeds a few years ago, and then it was discontinued because the government said, your air is too clean. The air in Leeds has more or less been getting better since the Clean Air Act in 1956, virtually all the time. And it's just a question of, particularly at the moment, with the cost of living pressures that people are under, that to put another charge on essentially poorish people who can't afford the biggest cars and the most modern models, it's just not fair on them at all.
OK, Neil Buckley, Sarah Rowe, thank you ever so much for coming in to chat with us.